Alien girl returned to the human who saved her, not to thank him, but to ask one gentle favor. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. Jake Thompson never expected to find himself in this situation. A simple mission to secure a new research site on an alien planet had turned into a rescue operation, and now, as he watched the alien girl he had saved slowly step toward him again, his heart began to race with confusion. He had been part of an off-world security team, trained to deal with high-risk scenarios. But nothing had prepared him for the moment he found her. The girl with shimmering, pale blue skin, eyes like silver pools, and the grace of a creature he could barely comprehend. When the explosion sent her shuttle crashing, Jake was the one who managed to reach her in time, pulling her out of the wreckage just before the hostile forces arrived. But that was weeks ago. He thought he'd never see her again. He'd done his duty. He saved her life. He'd expected nothing in return. But there she was, standing in front of him. She wasn't here to thank him. No, that was far too simple for her. Her gaze was calm, but filled with something deeper, something Jake couldn't quite place. She was an alien, a powerful being from a world far beyond his own. Her name was Elira, and she was the last of her kind. Her people had been wiped out in an intergalactic war, leaving her to survive alone in the vast expanse of space. And now, she stood before him, not as a helpless victim but as a woman with a purpose, with something she needed from him. Jake had always thought of himself as a practical man. He didn't get caught up in the emotions of others, and he certainly never expected any kind of reward for his actions. Yet, there she was, looking at him with a steady expression, her words soft but intense. "Jake Thompson," she said, her voice carrying an air of dignity that reminded him of her strength. "I didn't come here to thank you, though your actions have meant more to me than you know. I came to ask you for something far more important." Jake's brow furrowed in confusion. He had no idea what she could want, but the tone in her voice was not one to ignore. He nodded slowly, ready to hear her out. As Elira stepped closer, her silver eyes never left his. The air between them seemed to thrum with a strange energy, and Jake could feel it in his chest, like a slow burn. This was more than just a request. It was a turning point. "I need your help, Jake," she continued, her gaze softening ever so slightly. "I need you to accompany me to my homeworld. There is something there I cannot do alone. Something that only you can help me with." Jake's mind raced as he processed her words. It seemed impossible. But Elira was an alien, a creature from a different galaxy, and yet she seemed to trust him more than anyone he had ever known. His first instinct was to refuse. He didn't belong in her world. But looking at her, seeing the vulnerability beneath her poised exterior, something shifted inside him. Elira wasn't just any alien. She was more than that. She was someone he could understand. She had been through pain, loss, and survival, just like him. Maybe that was why he couldn't refuse her. He felt it in the pit of his stomach, a desire to protect her, to see her succeed. "I'll go with you," he said, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding. "Tell me what we need to do." The moment the words left his mouth, Elira's expression softened, just a little. It was barely noticeable, but it was there, a small, grateful smile that made Jake's heart skip a beat. And in that instant, Jake understood. This was only the beginning. The favor she needed was not just about helping her with her mission. It was about something deeper, something that neither of them could have anticipated. A bond that would forever change the course of their lives. The adventure they were about to embark on was far from what Jake had ever imagined. But one thing was certain, it would be a journey he would never forget. "I had no idea what I was getting into," Jake said, looking at Elira with a serious expression. They stood together on the bridge of his small transport ship, the stars stretched out before them like a never-ending sea of light. "But here we are, ready to go to your homeworld." Elira, standing tall beside him, nodded. Her eyes shimmered with determination, though her usual air of regality was now tempered by a quiet vulnerability. "You don't have to do this," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight that Jake could almost feel. "You could turn back, go back to your life." But you chose to stay, to help me. Jake's gaze softened. He wasn't one to make rash decisions, but something about Illyra had drawn him in from the moment they met. You've already shown me enough to prove that I can't just leave you to face this alone. I'm not the type to walk away from a challenge, especially not one that involves you. Illyra's lips parted in a faint smile, though she quickly masked it. This mission, she began, pausing as if carefully choosing her words, is not just about saving my people or completing a task. It's about understanding what remains of my kind, and whether we can truly be saved. There's a chance that the last of our legacy lies in the ruins of an ancient city on my planet. It's not just a place of ruins. It's where everything began. Jake tilted his head, curious. You never said anything about that before. Why the secrecy? Illyra's expression grew distant for a moment, as if recalling memories long buried. I wasn't sure if I could trust you with that information. But now, I realize it's the only way forward. We may find more than just the remnants of my people. We may find answers to questions that have haunted me for as long as I can remember. Jake absorbed her words carefully. This wasn't just a mission to help an alien woman anymore. This was something personal for her, something that could potentially change everything. I'm ready, Jake said, his voice steady. Whatever comes next, I'm with you. She nodded once, a flicker of gratitude in her gaze, but she quickly turned away, her focus returning to the task ahead. The silence between them felt heavy, not uncomfortable, but filled with the weight of the unknown. Jake set the course for the planet. They were about to embark on something far beyond what he could have ever expected. As the ship entered hyperspace, the lights outside flickered into lines of pure energy, and Jake sat back in his chair, feeling a strange mix of anticipation and unease. There was something about this journey that felt different from anything he had done before. He had saved her, yes, but in doing so, he had also found himself caught up in something much larger. The pull of curiosity, the bond they were forming, and the mystery of what lay ahead for Illyra and her people. It was all too big to ignore. As the hours passed in the quiet hum of the ship's engines, Jake couldn't help but think about what Illyra had said. The city on her planet, the one that held the key to everything, was not just a forgotten relic. It was a place of answers, and perhaps a place of redemption. For both of them. But Jake had to admit, he wasn't entirely sure what he was expecting to find there. Ancient technology? Hidden secrets? Or perhaps something far more personal, something that would change the course of his life forever. Whatever it was, he wasn't turning back. The stars blurred into streaks of light as the ship continued its journey, and Jake's thoughts drifted, not just to Illyra's past, but to the future that lay ahead. He had no idea how much this mission would ask of him, but he knew he wasn't prepared to walk away from it. Not when it meant so much to her, and, in some strange way, to him as well. As the ship approached Illyra's home planet, the tension in the cockpit was palpable. Jake adjusted the controls, his fingers moving with practiced ease, but his mind was elsewhere, tangled in thoughts of what awaited them. The stars outside the viewport slowly began to shift, revealing the planet below, a world that Jake could barely comprehend. It was a place that seemed to be both alive and ancient, covered in sprawling cities that shimmered with an otherworldly glow, surrounded by vast stretches of untamed wilderness. This is it, Illyra said softly from behind him. Her voice carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words, but Jake could sense the nervous energy in her tone. This is where everything started, Jake. The city that holds the secrets of my people. Jake nodded, not trusting his voice to say anything meaningful. He had no idea what kind of secrets they were about to uncover, but something deep inside told him that this place was far more than just ruins. It was a reflection of Illyra herself. A place that had been untouched by time, yet marked by a history that had shaped the woman before him. As the ship descended toward the planet's surface, the landscape below grew clearer. Massive stone structures rose from the ground, their jagged edges softened by the years, as if nature itself was trying to reclaim the past. But there were signs of life, too. Small villages scattered among the ruins, with alien figures moving through the streets, oblivious to the visitors from another world. Are we ready? Jake asked, turning to look at Illyra. She stood in the doorway, her gaze fixed on the city below, her features softened by a mix of longing and determination. I don't know if I'll ever be ready for this, she replied quietly, her voice distant. But I have to go. There are things I need to understand about my people, about what happened to us. And I can't do it alone. Jake stood up, walking over to her. You're not alone, he said simply, his voice steady. I'm with you. Every step of the way. Alira's eyes met his, and for a moment, they shared a look that spoke volumes. Of trust, of hope, and of something that neither of them could yet name. Thank you, she whispered. The words were simple, but the meaning behind them was anything but. The ship touched down softly on the planet's surface, and the doors slid open with a quiet hiss. Alira led the way, stepping out into the cool air, the dust of centuries swirling around her. Jake followed, his boots crunching against the ground as he took in the ancient city before them. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Vast, empty, and yet filled with an eerie kind of energy, as if the very air was alive with memories. Alira moved with purpose, her steps quick but careful, as if she were walking through a place both familiar and foreign to her. Jake kept pace, his eyes scanning their surroundings, always alert. They passed through the gates of the city, which loomed high above them, ancient carvings marking the stone walls, symbols Jake couldn't decipher, but which Alira seemed to recognize instinctively. This is where we begin, Alira said softly, her voice steady now, filled with resolve. This is where we uncover the truth. As they walked deeper into the city, Jake couldn't help but feel the weight of the history around them, the echoes of a long-lost civilization whispering through the ruins. There was something powerful about this place, something that called to Alira in a way he couldn't fully understand. But he knew one thing for sure. They were on the cusp of discovering something that would change everything. And as the doors to an ancient temple loomed before them, Jake felt a chill run down his spine. This was only the beginning. The ancient temple loomed ahead, its towering spires cutting into the sky like jagged fingers reaching for the stars. The air around Jake and Alira was thick with a strange energy, an unsettling mix of awe and trepidation. As they approached, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to uncover something monumental, something that would reshape everything they knew. The temple's massive doors stood before them, cracked and weathered with age, but still imposing. Alira moved with determination, her every step measured, as if she had walked this path before. This is it, she said quietly, almost to herself. This is where the answers lie. Jake watched her closely. There was a quiet resolve in her eyes, a spark of something that told him this place meant more to her than just the survival of her people. It was personal, a part of her very identity. He could sense the weight of history on her shoulders as she stood before the ancient stone doors. With a steady breath, she reached out, her hand brushing against the surface of the door. For a moment, the air seemed to hum, as if the very stone was alive, reacting to her touch. Slowly, the doors creaked open, revealing the dark interior of the temple. The flickering light from the ship's exterior reflected off the ancient walls, casting strange shadows that danced and shifted with every movement. Alira stepped forward, her movements fluid and graceful as she entered the temple. Jake followed closely behind, his senses alert. The interior of the temple was vast, filled with towering columns that stretched high into the darkness. The walls were covered in intricate carvings, strange symbols, and pictures that seemed to tell the story of a civilization long gone. Alira's eyes scanned the room, her gaze focused as if searching for something specific. This place is ancient, Jake said, his voice low. How old is it? Alira didn't answer immediately. She was too focused on the carvings to speak. Instead, she ran her fingers lightly over the stone, her touch reverent. It's older than most civilizations, she replied after a moment. Older than anything you could imagine. Her voice was filled with a mix of wonder and sorrow, as if the temple itself held the ghosts of her people. This is where my ancestors gathered, where they learned and created. Everything we were, everything we are, started here. As they moved deeper into the temple, Jake could feel the air grow cooler, the weight of the place pressing down on him. There was a quiet, almost oppressive silence that hung in the air, broken only by the sound of their footsteps echoing in the vastness. The further they went, the more Jake felt that this wasn't just a place of learning or culture. There was something else here, something far more powerful and dangerous. What are we looking for? Jake asked, his voice breaking the silence. Alira glanced back at him, her eyes distant, filled with memories. "The heart of the temple," she said softly. "The source of everything. It said that the power of my people, our connection to the stars, is contained within it." She paused, her expression turning serious. "But it's not just about power. It's about understanding what happened to us. Why were the last ones left?" Jake didn't respond immediately. He could sense the depth of emotion in her words, the pain and loss that haunted her. She had already lost so much, her people, her home, and now she was searching for answers that might never come. "We'll find it," he said, his voice firm. "Whatever it takes." Alira's gaze met his, and for a brief moment, the weight of everything between them seemed to vanish. She nodded, her expression softening, if only slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. The silence returned, but this time, it felt less oppressive. Together, they moved forward into the heart of the temple, where the truth, whatever it was, awaited them. The deeper they ventured, the more Jake felt the air grow heavy with anticipation. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They were no longer just searching for answers. They were searching for a future. And that future, whatever it might be, was bound to change everything. As Jake and Alira continued through the vast corridors of the temple, a deep sense of wonder settled over him. The walls were covered with carvings, intricate, detailed, and mysterious. They depicted scenes from a world Jake could only imagine, battles, triumphs, and moments of celebration. The more they walked, the more Jake felt the weight of what they were about to uncover. He glanced at Alira, who was walking ahead, her focus entirely on the path before her. Her posture was confident, but Jake could sense the subtle tension in her movements. She wasn't just leading him through the temple. She was leading herself through memories that she had long buried. "We're getting closer," Alira said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. Jake nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what that meant. Closer to what exactly? The truth? The source of her people's power? Or something far more personal? As they rounded a corner, the path opened up into a massive chamber. The ceiling was impossibly high, its surface covered in faintly glowing symbols. In the center of the room, on a raised platform, stood an enormous stone altar, ancient and weathered by time. But what truly caught Jake's attention was the soft, pulsing light emanating from the altar. It was faint at first, barely noticeable, but as they approached, the light grew stronger. Alira stopped in her tracks, her gaze fixed on the altar. Jake could see her chest rise and fall with each breath she took, as if she were steeling herself for something. "This is it," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "The heart of my people." Jake felt his heart race as he stepped closer, his eyes drawn to the altar. The light seemed to beckon them, pulling them forward as though it had a life of its own. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Alira's eyes remained fixed on the altar, but her expression softened. "It's a relic of my people's past," she replied. "A source of power, knowledge, and wisdom. It was the key to everything we were, and now it's all that remains." Jake could see the pain in her eyes as she spoke. This wasn't just about uncovering ancient secrets or gaining power. It was about her connection to her people, to her heritage. "Is this where you find the answers?" Jake asked, taking a step closer. Alira finally turned to look at him, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and uncertainty. "I hope so," she said softly. "But I can't be sure. All I know is that I need to understand. I need to know why we're the last ones left. What happened to us?" Jake reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, offering her a reassuring smile. "Whatever the answer is, we'll face it together," he said, his voice steady. Alira nodded, her gaze returning to the altar. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the glowing stone. As her fingers brushed the surface, the light from the altar surged, enveloping the room in a brilliant glow. For a moment, everything was silent, the only sound the soft hum of energy filling the space. Then, as quickly as it had come, the light faded, leaving behind a strange stillness. Alira stepped back, her expression unreadable as she turned to Jake. "It's begun," she said quietly. Jake's heart skipped a beat as he watched her. The journey they had embarked on had just shifted into something far deeper, something that would require more than just courage. It would require everything they had. And as they stood there, in the heart of the ancient temple, Jake knew they were about to uncover truths that would change not only Illyra's life, but his own as well. The moment the light from the altar faded, the room seemed to shift. Jake stood still, his eyes fixed on Illyra, who was staring at the glowing stone, her face a mixture of awe and confusion. The energy that had filled the room moments ago now left behind an unsettling silence. Illyra's hand still hovered above the altar, her fingers trembling slightly, as if she were trying to process what had just happened. "What did you see?" Jake asked softly, stepping closer. Illyra shook her head slowly, her expression distant, as if she were still lost in the aftermath of the light. "I saw flashes," she said, her voice low. "Images. Moments from my people's past, and the moment we disappeared." Jake's heart tightened. He could sense the gravity in her words. This wasn't just about finding answers. It was about confronting the very foundation of her people's existence. "And what did they tell you?" Illyra's eyes met his, and for a moment, Jake could see the weight of centuries of history in her gaze. "That we weren't meant to survive," she said softly. "Our people were too ambitious, too driven by power. We sought to control things that shouldn't have been touched." Jake didn't respond immediately. He wasn't sure what to say. The weight of her words hung in the air, thick with unspoken truths. "But I thought your people were advanced," Jake said, trying to understand. "Your technology, your knowledge. How could something like that lead to this?" Illyra took a deep breath, turning back toward the altar. "It's not just about technology," she said, her voice gaining strength. "It was our arrogance, our belief that we could conquer the stars without consequence. We pushed beyond our limits, and in doing so, we fractured everything. The power we sought to harness consumed us." Jake absorbed her words, his mind racing to process the implications. He had always known that power came with a price, but hearing Illyra speak about it with such raw emotion made him realize how deep that cost went. "So what does that mean for you? For your people?" Jake asked, his voice quiet but filled with concern. Illyra turned back to him, her eyes steady now. "It means I have to understand it. I have to uncover the full truth. Because if we don't, the mistakes of the past could destroy what little we have left." Jake nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving her. He could see the determination in her eyes, and for the first time, he realized how much this mission meant to her. This wasn't just about uncovering lost history, it was about redemption. Illyra's redemption. And maybe, just maybe, the redemption of her people. She stepped away from the altar, her movements deliberate, and Jake followed her without a word. The journey ahead would be difficult, and the answers they sought might not come easily. But one thing was certain. They had come this far, and there was no turning back now. Together they would face whatever lay ahead in this ancient temple, whatever truth it held. "Let's keep moving," Illyra said, her voice firm with resolve. "The truth is still out there, and we have to find it." As they continued deeper into the temple, Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever awaited them, he knew he wouldn't let Illyra face it alone. They were in this together, for better or worse, and that was enough to keep him going. With each step, they moved closer to uncovering the secrets of Illyra's past, and with it, the future of her people. The deeper they ventured into the temple, the more the air seemed to thrum with a strange energy, a hum that filled the space around them. Jake could feel it in his chest, a vibration that matched the pulse of his own heartbeat. The walls, once covered in carvings, now revealed more intricate designs, strange symbols that seemed to move as they passed by, as if alive with some ancient force. Illyra moved ahead, her focus unwavering as she navigated through the twisting corridors. She had grown quiet, absorbed in the journey, but Jake could sense her thoughts racing. "Are we close?" he asked, his voice breaking the silence. Illyra's response was almost immediate, though it carried a weight. "Yes," she said, her voice steady but tinged with a deep, unspoken emotion. "This is the place. The final chamber." Jake nodded, his hand resting on the hilt of his sidearm, though he hadn't expected to need it. The strange atmosphere, the flickering lights, and the oppressive silence all made him feel like they were on the verge of something monumental. As they entered the final chamber, the room stretched out before them, vast and ancient. In the center of the room, a large pedestal stood, its surface covered in dust and age. Atop the pedestal, a single, glowing orb pulsed softly with an inner light. It was the source of the strange energy they had felt. Alira approached it slowly, reverently, as if the orb itself held the key to her past. "This is it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Jake stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the glowing orb. It wasn't just a source of light. It was a symbol of everything Alira had lost and everything she hoped to find again. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Alira didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stood before the orb, her hands trembling slightly as she reached out to touch it. The moment her fingers made contact, the room seemed to come alive. The orb's light intensified, casting sharp shadows across the stone walls. The hum of energy grew louder, vibrating through Jake's very bones. Then, a voice, soft but unmistakable, echoed through the chamber. It was an ancient language, one Jake didn't understand, but Alira seemed to recognize it immediately. She closed her eyes, her expression one of concentration, as if she were listening to the words that only she could hear. "What's happening?" Jake asked, his voice filled with both concern and wonder. Alira opened her eyes, her gaze distant as she spoke, her voice shaking. It's my people's history, their legacy. This orb, it contains everything we were, everything we lost." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I have to listen. I have to understand what happened to us, so that we don't make the same mistakes again." Jake stood still, watching as Alira's expression shifted from confusion to clarity. The orb's light seemed to be guiding her, unlocking memories and visions that only she could see. For a moment, Jake felt like an outsider, unable to fully grasp what Alira was experiencing. But he knew one thing for certain. This moment was hers, and he would stand by her through it, whatever came next. Slowly, Alira's hands lowered from the orb, and the light began to fade, returning the room to its former stillness. She took a step back, her eyes now filled with something Jake hadn't seen before, a sense of peace. "I understand now," she said softly, her voice steady once more. "I know what we must do." Jake moved closer, his eyes searching hers. "What is it?" he asked, his heart racing with anticipation. Alira's gaze never wavered. "We have to return to the stars," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "We can't stay hidden in the shadows anymore. My people, they need to be found, and I need to lead them. It's time to rebuild." Jake nodded, his heart swelling with pride. He knew that Alira was no longer just a survivor. She was a leader, and she had found her purpose. And whatever journey lay ahead, Jake knew he would be with her every step of the way. The journey back to the ship felt like a dream. Alira walked beside Jake, her eyes set with a newfound resolve, and yet there was a quiet sadness in her gaze, a weight she had carried for so long. The knowledge she had unlocked in the temple had changed her, made her see her people's past not as a burden, but as a guiding force for the future. She had found her purpose. "So what's next?" Jake asked, breaking the silence between them. Alira turned to look at him, her expression calm, but there was an intensity in her eyes that spoke volumes. "We need to gather our people," she said, her voice steady. "My people have scattered across the galaxy, hiding, surviving. I can feel them out there, and it's time we come together. It's time we rebuild." Jake nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. He had seen the strength in her before, but now he saw something even more powerful: hope. Hope for a future her people thought was lost forever. As they approached the ship, Alira paused, looking up at the sky. The stars stretched out before them, infinite and waiting. "Do you think we can do it?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with determination. "I know we can," Jake replied without hesitation. He stepped closer to her, his words steady and filled with conviction. "You've already done the hardest part. You've faced the past and the truth. Now, we take the next step together." Alira turned to face him fully, her expression unreadable for a moment before it softened. "Thank you, Jake," she whispered. "I wouldn't have made it this far without you." Jake smiled, the weight of her words sinking in. "No need to thank me," he said, his voice light but sincere. "I'm just doing what anyone would do." But Alira knew it was more than that. Jake had given her more than just physical help. He had given her something she hadn't expected: support, understanding, and a partnership that had begun to evolve into something deeper. As they boarded the ship and prepared for their next move, Jake took the controls. Alira stood by his side, her gaze fixed on the stars once again. The ship lifted off smoothly, breaking through the atmosphere, and they both watched as the planet below grew smaller and smaller, the vastness of space unfolding before them. It was a new beginning. Alira could feel it, deep in her bones. This journey wasn't just about finding the last remnants of her people. It was about forging a new path, one where they could thrive again. She glanced at Jake, who was focused on the controls, his eyes scanning the vastness ahead. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for him, but also something more, something she couldn't name yet. They were in this together, and that was all that mattered. The ship accelerated into the stars, and Alira felt the weight of her people's legacy pressing against her. But now, it was a challenge she was ready to face. They had a future to create. Together, they would find the scattered pieces of her people and rebuild. And maybe, just maybe, they would find something even more precious along the way, a place where they truly belonged, a place where they could start anew. The journey had taken them far from the temple, out into the unknown reaches of the galaxy. Alira sat beside Jake, her eyes fixed on the stars outside the ship's viewport. The ship hummed steadily beneath them, the only sound in the silence that had become their constant companion. They had charted their course, following the signals Alira had sensed, faint pulses that reached out like a thread pulling them toward a scattered people lost to time. Jake glanced over at her, his eyes softening as he took in the quiet determination on her face. "Are you all right?" he asked, breaking the silence. Alira turned toward him, her silver eyes meeting his, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something more, something that went beyond their mission. "I'm fine," she replied, though her voice held the quiet weight of unspoken thoughts. "Just thinking." Jake nodded, understanding that there were still things she needed to process. The truth of her people's past had weighed heavily on her, and the burden of their survival was not something she would cast aside easily. He had seen it in her eyes, felt it in the quiet moments when she looked out at the stars. It was a burden he couldn't fully understand, but one he knew he had to help her carry. "You don't have to do this alone, Alira," Jake said, his voice steady. "I'm with you, every step of the way." Alira's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to lean into the reassurance he offered. "I know," she said quietly, "and I'm grateful for that. I couldn't have made it this far without you." Jake smiled, though there was a touch of sadness behind it. He wasn't sure what would happen once they found her people, but he knew that the journey ahead would be just as uncertain as the one they had already traveled. "We'll find them," Jake said, his voice firm. "Wherever they are, we'll find them, and we'll help them rebuild." Alira's eyes drifted back to the stars, and Jake followed her gaze, feeling the same sense of hope and trepidation that she did. They were on the verge of something monumental, something that could change the course of not only her people's future, but his own as well. "Do you ever wonder what comes after?" Alira asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake frowned, not sure if he understood her question. "After what?" "After we find them," she clarified. "After we rebuild. What happens then?" Jake considered her question for a long moment, unsure of what to say. There was so much unknown in the galaxy, so many uncertainties ahead. But one thing was clear to him. Whatever came next, they would face it together. "We live," Jake said finally, his voice steady. "We live and we build. One day at a time." Alira nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with something that felt like acceptance. "One day at a time," she echoed softly. The ship continued its journey through the vastness of space, and for the first time in a long while, Alira felt a small spark of hope. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and unknowns, but for the first time, she believed they could find their way. And with Jake by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Together, they would rebuild what had been lost and find a future worth fighting for.